Alaysha, where are you right now?
I'm in LA and it's 10 a.m.
Oh my God.
Oof.
Seems we are live.
Yeah. Julie, we're live?
Yes.
It says
Okay.
we're live.
Okay, great. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the panel discussion on ageism that Opera Programs Berlin is producing. It is with great pleasure that I will introduce the panel today. And we're going to go around and everybody's going to introduce who they are and how the ageism discussion is important, particularly in this point of time. So let's start with Stefan Reineke. Hi, Stefan.
Hi, everybody. Hi, I'm Stefan. I'm 49 years old. I'm an artist manager since 15 years now, I think it is. I actually studied law and musicology over here in Germany. I was firstly working for some institutions like the Komische Oper here in Berlin and the artistic administration for some years, and then for the Berlin Radio Choir. I was then personal assistant of the intendant of the Opera House in Dortmund, that theater. I was also working for a foundation here in Berlin supporting young and talented artists as managing president, and in some weird constellations, I went over to the dark side. I'm now this, this agent type of guy. There is an agency called TAC International Art Management. That's our house, and I'm doing actually quite a lot of audition trainings and coachings together with colleagues here in Berlin at the Hans Eisler School and the University of the Arts and at the Dutch National Opera Young Artist Program, which is a lot of fun. And that's also, I think, in a way how I came to know Anastasia and Julia. That's me.
Okay, great, thank you. So maybe Andrea Nwoke next. Hi, Andrea.
Hi, Andrea Nwoke. I am a Nigerian-American soprano living in New York. 13 years today, actually. I need to celebrate that. I'm making it. I've made it here. I've sung basically my whole life, very, very much in love with music and classical music in particular from a very young age, about 5 or 6 actually. And so I had voice lessons and things all through my growing up, and did my undergrad and graduate work in voice and opera. So that's one side of me. I live a little bit of a double life because I've spent quite some time in the corporate world and am now working as an executive and empowerment coach in addition to being a business consultant. So I kind of marry both worlds and work very often now with arts organizations on the leadership side and consulting in DEI and leadership and what have you. So I've got an interesting sort of perspective from both being an artist and now trying to train leaders to step up.
Great. Thank you, Andrea. So maybe next, Francesca Mondanaro.
Correct. My name is Francesca. Hello, everybody. I'm a dramatic soprano who's willing to publicly admit that she's over 40 years old. And I'm very proud of that because I am the perfect example of a late bloomer. I went to the Curtis Institute of Music from the time that I was 18 years old. And I went through about 5 voice teachers that didn't quite know what to do with me because I literally wasn't old enough yet for my instrument. I didn't find a teacher who knew what to do with me until my last year before I graduated. So my whole career trajectory did not fit into what the American ideal is, which is you either go straight from conservatory into a prestigious young artist program and end up with management, or you go to a conservatory and you land first or second or third prize in a world-renowned competition and end up with a manager. It always happened for me in a very circuitous manner. And I had walked away from singing more than once because I had to make the decision as to whether I wanted to pay my electric bill or pay for my voice lessons, which is something that, is worth discussing, especially for a certain vocal fach that tends to mature past the late 20s. So I found myself lucky enough with artistic directors and intendants that were fans of my singing personally, that I was always pulled forward. I always had one person with the power of casting who didn't care whether or not I had a politically correct resume or was a 28-year-old Lady Macbeth. They were in love enough with my singing and my artistry that my age did not come into question. And I have sung in bee houses in the US. I made my debut as a guest artist singing Abigail in Nabucco at Deutsche Oper in 2017. I've had 3 seasons with them so far. I'm continuing to sing once all of my gigs that were canceled when the pandemic hit are rescheduled. I'm looking forward to an Anna Bolena. Right now, I'm in the middle of a filming project for Teatro Grattacielo to be able to sing Marguerite with some really, really wonderful singers. And in addition to enjoying a full performance schedule, I'm now teaching as much as I'm singing. So I feel that I have a unique filter on the concept of ageism because I personally have experienced the challenges of being faced with ageism in my own career trajectory, and now as kind of a mama bear for my own students that really have professional potential. I'm trying to find my way around ageism for them as well. So I think in this time in particular, when we are all taking a step back to look at the industry at large and how it does or does not reflect the larger humanitarian values in the way that we're trying to be more open and be more understanding, I think it's an opportunity. It's a moment in time that's an opportunity to look at ageism in the same way that we're looking at representation of ethnic culture and race as well. So I'm very grateful to be on this panel.
Lovely to have you. Thank you. So maybe next, Alaysha Fox. Would you like to say something? Who are you?
Hi, my name is Alaysha Fox, and I am a soprano, a young soprano. I'm 28, and I'll be turning 29 soon. Actually, I'm considered an elderly young artist, so that's something that's interesting. And I find, similar to Francesca, as a bigger voiced young individual, I graduated from MSM. I went to MSM for my master's and my undergraduate, and you know, people were very careful with me there. I can't say that they didn't know what to do with me, but they were very careful. And so my resume is not what you would think. I had to work a lot. And in between, I worked for 4 years. So the trajectory for somebody who has a bigger voice is still pretty much the same. It's like, kind of got to bide your time. And I just recently, last year, was in the Met competition, and from the Met competition, got into LA Opera on kind of what was considered like my last year of eligibility to become like a full-fledged young artist and kind of go more the traditional route. So I count myself lucky and thank my stars, but I find that ageism on both sides of the spectrum is really important to discuss because it's so nuanced and it's not often discussed. Like, if you're a young artist and you have great potential, but you haven't yet mastered the craft, and you get to a place where you're out of school, you just kind of got to figure it out. And much like Francesca said, it becomes the choice of, am I going to pay my electric bill? Am I going to take lessons? And that has been kind of my journey to where I am right now. And I'm in a good place. And as far as, you know, anyone can be in a good place with COVID and everything. But I'm really looking forward to this discussion and seeing where it leads.
Awesome. Great. Thank you. Jeremy Osborne.
Hi, my name is Jeremy Osborne. I was born and raised in Arkansas. got my bachelor's degree in vocal performance there. Then I went to the Peabody Conservatory, got a master's. And then there was a bit of wandering. I stayed for a year in Baltimore. And I worked at I was doing data entry for an insurance company, for a health insurance company. Then I moved to New York, where I lived there for 2 years. I actually followed a teacher who I really wanted to study with, but as soon as I got my stuff together and got up to New York, he got a job at a university on the other side of the country. So that was really frustrating. So he had recommended I study with a student of his, and I did, because I didn't have a nice time in grad school as far as teachers. And I spent a lot, it took me a couple of years, I think, to get rid of the tensions that I had. I had a teacher who I think, in my opinion, encouraged people to push, to press, really. And so that took a little bit, a while to get rid of, or to work through, rather. Then in 2013, I moved to France. I think I told people at the time, I was like, oh, I'm going to further my career, but I really think I was just finding myself. I was 27 and I thought, well, if I don't go see Europe, I never will. I had never been to Europe before. And my mother had been an exchange student coordinator, and I was supposed to stay with a former student, exchange student that we'd had. But he then, as soon as I got there, this is always my story, right? I get there, people leave. He got there, and then he got a job working at a clean energy firm in the United States. So I was just there on my own. I met a lot of cool people. It was great. And then one was a woman from Munich. And then when she was going back to Munich, we hitchhiked because we were insane, from Nice to Munich. And it was a wild experience. Stayed there, saw some operas in Munich, had a nice time. And then I carpooled to Berlin and loved it. I was like, I want to move here. And then I did a couple months later, been here since 2014, sung extra chorus, the Deutsche Oper, Komische Oper. I have a wonderful relationship with the teacher, Janet Williams. Met obviously Francesca, who's also been a great mentor. And I also have this parallel career as a translator and doing like voiceovers and things like that. Why ageism in particular interests me is because it runs contrary to what is necessary for the art form to thrive. The thing is about singing is it's one of the few physical activities that people come into their own later in life. It doesn't work like, acting where you can be, 17 and, oh, this is the hot young thing. It takes a little while. This has to grow up a little bit. And when you're cutting people off and denying them resources because they've not developed fast enough, you end up in this situation where we are now. Because what a lot of people don't necessarily want to talk about is before COVID and the COVID crisis and this pandemic, which is very serious, we were already in something of kind of an artistic pandemic in opera. There's been a lot of problems with the development of dramatic voices for a long time now. And now there's a study that I feel like I'm constantly referencing that this guy did from Princeton, where he's demonstrated that there's almost a consensus that there's been a decline in Verdi and Wagner singing since the second golden age, like they call it, the 60s and 70s. That's not just hyperbole, it's not nostalgia, that's actually happening. And I think one of the main reasons is because the gatekeeping, the industry's gatekeeping, blocks a lot of potentially outstanding artists from resources and being able to develop their full potential. And that's something that's a big problem in the United States and all over the place, but particularly in the United States at the moment, because there's so much inequality, economic inequality. So I think that this is also a manifestation of that. And I also think that we also should maybe mention the fact that the conservatory system and the training systems kind of benefit from the fact that they're able to swap people away on the basis of their age. Because what happens is, if you have to go to CCM to be, or to not, I shouldn't say names of conservatories, there are good, maybe good things at CCM. But when there are young artist programs where there's an unwritten rule that you have to have attended a certain institution to be able to go, and it's already kind of understood that you need to be a certain age if you're applying to this institution, there's this kind of understanding that if you are older and you had a different path, a different trajectory, that you're not going to have a chance. And I definitely think that that is something that I've experienced. It's much better here as somebody who is a person who has a kind of a parallel career. You're just simply not taken seriously. You're not taken seriously, you're not given a chance. And even with things like competitions, you're just not allowed to play. It's just, you're not allowed to participate at all. And there's also a bit of a shadow industry, I think, of people then who are, I think, in positions like me, where they have a side career and then they end up kind of participating in things, in opportunities that either are for pay or that are not necessarily a particularly high quality, because the industry, the proper industry, will not even give them a chance, even though they're wonderfully talented individuals who simply didn't develop along that timeline. I feel like I'm filibustering a little bit at this point, but those are kind of my thoughts at the moment. So.
Great, thank you so much, Jeremy. It's lovely to have you. So maybe next we can have Rosalind Plowright introduce herself.
I'll unmute myself. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you.
Now I'm a British opera singer. I've been around absolute years. I'm 71. I've had sort of 3 careers. I've been a spinto soprano singing all the major Verdi and some Wagner as way back in the 80s. I then digressed to being a mezzo when I was 50, and I sang the dramatic mezzo repertory. I'm sort of now in my 3rd career doing all the old lady parts, which are great. Contralto parts, you know, character roles, they're wonderful. I've always sung throughout, except for when I had my children. I took a bit of time off. I won't talk about my training because it was so long ago, but I'm astounded listening to all you lot because you're all so young. My goodness. I'm wondering what I'm doing here really, but I've had a few knocks and bangs along the way. It's been a bit of a roller coaster, my career, up and down. But it started very high up. I was lucky enough to record with Deutsche Grammophon and Placido Domingo and Giulini and all sorts of amazing colleagues back then. It's like another life. I mean, who was that person back then? But, you know, I have experienced ageism when I was young and now when I'm older as well. Yeah, so I've got a bit to say on the subject, but I do agree that you know, voices, some bigger voices do take time. And I think, you know, in your 40s, you should be in your prime. You're not old. You're ready to do these big roles, you know. So I won't waffle on, but because I think you probably want to get on with the discussion. But I have been around a long time. I've been singing for 45 years. So I've seen all sorts of things. I'm the voice of experience, you might say. So I hope I can contribute something towards this.
It's fantastic. Thank you so much, Rosalind. So maybe Caro Mastrodomenico, we can have you introduce yourself next.
Sure. So as Anastasia said, I'm Caro Mastrodomenico, and it's interesting to, like Stefan just said, his age right out, and so did Rosalind, and I immediately felt this siege in my chest, because I was like, oh my God, do we have to say our age? And now I'm like, okay, I'm 51. But initially that sense of like not saying your age out loud, I just was taken with that. And so there you go. I'm 51 and my heart is beating very quickly. And I have told you all of that. I wear many hats. So I was an Ina Etta girl, sang lots, so real soubrette. When I was going through schooling and singing, soubrettes didn't last very long. You couldn't be, nobody wanted to see a 40-year-old Musetta or Susanna or, and although your voice does change and grow and you could become it something else, it was a little harder. I also chose to have a family. That was also an interesting thing to feel when you make those choices. So I went into academia and pedagogy, and so I teach at Laundry School of Music at Bard College in Boston, as well as Tufts University, and then Dramatic Voices in Berlin. So I have this, and I have an obsession with pedagogy and the way the body works and the voice and how it changes, and that we should sing through those changes rather than trying to avoid them. And then I direct opera in both institutions, trying to foster a new way of seeing this art form. Boston is an interesting city in that we don't have a major opera company. And so we're constantly trying to reinvent it or make it accessible to all different people of all different ages, of all different backgrounds. And so why is ageism important? Because I've experienced it on both sides, both as an individual and as a teacher. I always think of that article that was in, I believe it was Classical Singer, Mignon Dunn, Where Are All the Dramatic Voices, I believe was the title of it. Well, they're still there. They're just, you can't put competition cutoffs at 30. And then, you have to allow some of the younger, the different voice types to progress so that, their careers aren't over at 30 if they haven't made it. So those are maybe like your Ina Eddas and your light lyrics. So ageism has been something that's pertinent in the past and also very present now. And I'm encouraged to talk further and be a part of this panel.
Great, thank you so much, Carol. And then one more, Tichina Vaughn. Who are you?
Well, my name is Tichina Vaughn, and I'm a dramatic mezzo-soprano. I have been in Germany. I live in Dresden, Germany, but I have been in Germany since 1996. I was 10 years in Stuttgart, where I became a Kammersänger. And then I joined the ensemble in Dresden in 2010. And in 2018, that contract was not extended. And so I've been the last couple of years freelance. I've been actually very fortunate in my career. I started very early. I started with 23, straight from North Carolina School of the Arts, or the University of North Carolina School of the Arts, with my undergraduate degree. I was accepted into Wolf Trap and then into the Met program, and I made my debut at the Met in Porgy and Bess. And now, many years later, I'm going to be 55 in just a couple of weeks. And I've had, a lot of great opportunities, but I definitely, and especially now as I'm over 50, and, it's funny because I did my first Amneris, for example, at 26, for which I, completely was not ready. And as I've aged and gone through the years and now feel completely ready, I'm too old, I remember also on the other side, considering the topic of ageism, when I was younger, and I came to the Met in a smaller role, Lily, and then I was covering Serena. But then there was opportunity for, when I was, say, 25, opportunity to do a production where I was Serena, but then I was too young, So I was very interested when I was asked to join this panel and discuss this issue of ageism on both sides, because I am also one of those believers that, this thing that we do is a marathon and not a sprint. And when I was a young artist there around the Met, it was not so often that you saw young people taking on the bigger things. I as a young artist spent, my days watching Domingo and Franny and Alfredo Kraus, and none of them were 29, So, and sometimes, as I've, been traveling now, I'm currently in Vienna doing a production, and, thank God, at post-lockdown, the first post-lockdown engagement. But, as I travel around and see different things, I also recognize, I agree with Jeremy that, the quality, especially of the dramatic things, has been diluted in the sense that I feel like the entire concept has become about the external and not the substance of the interest of the instruments and the artist and the craft. So I'm, really looking forward to engaging in this discussion, and very honored and glad to be part of the panel today.
We're super happy to have you. Thank you so much, everybody. Before we begin with the discussion, I wanted to mention that Susan Eichhorn Young was supposed to co-host with me, but she has been unable to do so because she's not feeling well. So we wish her, speedy recovery. So I will be hosting this panel by myself today. So without further ado, we're going to kind of launch into questions. The first thing that I wanted to chat about with all of you is kind of look at the roots of ageism. What is the ageism byproduct of? What is the intersectionality of ageism? Things like socioeconomic disadvantages, racism, nationalism, sizeism, patriarchy, stereotyping, and typecasting. So what say you?
So go.
Yes, go. Have you experienced that, and what have your careers shown? What are what is ageism byproduct of? What have you experienced?
I find that, in my opinion, ageism is already, in the bigger picture, a product of capitalism and greed. Because in my opinion, it is not obviously only a situation that we're dealing with in the operatic world, but it is a situation in most industries worldwide. When I think back to when I was a younger person, it was very unusual to see a CEO of a major Fortune 500 company who was less than 40 years old. Or 50, they mostly all had gray hair. And sometime in the last 20 years, it's become this sort of, thing to, oh, we have the youngest CEO ever, it's because he's been, pushed forward by the board or by the members or whatever. But do they have the experience? Do they have the knowledge, to run the company? And I just think that in a broader sense, that's the same thing that we're dealing with in opera. At some point, opera decided that it had to compete with pop music and MTV. And because I remember the first time they had the MTV Awards at the Metropolitan Opera, and it was all about this look, this thing of style over substance. And I think that that's the first part of it. But and all of that leads to the rest of the isms, in my opinion.
Mm.
Oops.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that I do agree that we've seen this over time. That I know that my father experienced it. He was in the financial world, being at an institution for 40 some odd years, built it up. And then all of a sudden it was, okay, we don't really want to pay you that salary. So we're gonna, ask you to retire. Not really, they couldn't ask, but basically they take away his dignity by taking away all the things that he actually did. And more younger people came up. And so like the experience that he had wasn't really valued, but it was more out of a money thing. The company doesn't want to pay for that anymore. They can do it for cheaper. And I feel like we see that in almost everything. And then also the packaging, everything is packaging. And if one more person says the word sexy to me, I think I'm going to scream, because I hate that even in direction. You never say to someone, okay, she's sexy. No, she's not. She's sensual, or, you know what I mean? Sexy is not, I don't even know what that word means sometimes, because it means so many different things to so many different people. And then to make it so that we produce, and now it more than ever, it's a visual and instantaneous. It needs to be, we have to inundate everybody with visuals and so YouTube and Twitter and it only this many words and and I'm not saying that it's all bad, but I am saying that I think we should take a breath and figure out what we want the substance of things to be. Substance, I love that word that you used, because I think we're missing some of that. I think we're missing the substance and the meaning and communication that we really want to come out. But but I agree that financially, I think it comes from there.
Stefan?
Well, I mean, in general, I think we all agree that ageism exists in all fields of the arts and in every other profession as well. And I mean, of course, opera and classical music is only reflecting, it's a reflection of society to that extent. I mean, there are some trivial points. I would say younger artists might be easier to handle for casting directors, you know, they might have lower fee expectations. And I mean, what I can say I'm a mediator. You know, I would only take over an artist if I know that I'm able to give him job opportunities and to assess his potential. But what I can say from our industry, what I can say from what opera directors think is that there is what they would probably say some kind of golden rules, that there are more or less let's say three decades. Yeah, the first 10 years a young artist would probably or should use to form his technical capabilities to the highest level possible. But most would say that should be aimed at, or he should have that at least at the age of 30, and then from 30 to 40, you will perform on that high level. And when you are able to create a name, to have a career, you might have another 10 years. But, you know, in general, people would always say in my business, they wouldn't say public, but they would say opera is connected to youth in a way. And so, an artist at the age of 15 is probably not younger, I mean, besides biological effects. And that's just, I mean, that's very frustrating, of course. And it's very saddening. And I don't know, I think there's also, by the way, probably a lack of fantasy. It's not only connected, it does not only apply to ageism, but also, you know, to the question of looks and other physical aspects. I mean, you know, why shouldn't all the people be allowed to fall in love? Why should only slim or young people be allowed to be lovers? Mm-hmm. It's a lack of fantasy in a way, you know. And I mean, we're having this regie theater nowadays. You all probably know what that means, director's theater. And you could do much more with this. You could be much more creative with these ideas. I don't know. Maybe people are afraid of that. Maybe they also think, you know, they all want to attract younger audiences. Maybe that's an aspect as well, that they feel, you know. But it's, I don't know. There is just a lack of appreciation of the positive aspects of aging in general in our business.
Well, I want to definitely jump in here and say that I think a lot of the ageism is related to the fact that there's this ruling ideology, what you had mentioned, Stefan, that among administrators at least, that the idea is to somehow attract a younger audience. The problem is you end up a lot of the time, or a lot of these organizations end up dumbing down the art form in the process. Because I'm going to say this, and I feel like it's not often said enough, and maybe some people will fight with me over it, I don't know. Opera is primarily a musical art form. There's a great quote by Thomas Hampson. He says, opera is a musical art form. It is not a theatrical art form. Its theatricality, to the extent that it is there, is born of its musical language, and not the other way around. So when you have a young person who is singing the Countess, who maybe looks nice in a way that, you know, you'd be like, wow, this is great. This would be great for film. The problem is opera isn't film, because the opera singers have to sing. And the primary mode of expression in opera is obviously the orchestral playing, at least of the operas of, you know, the genre's maturity, and the singing. So that's why I just never understand when people say, for example, oh, you know, Caballé was so big and blah, 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 when she was singing Mimi. There was actually a great article, I remember, when there was that Tara Arot controversy years ago, when that journalist said that she looked like a ball of puppy fat. He said some derogatory thing like that about her. And there was this great discussion all over the classical music world. And then there was an article in the New York Times where Tomasini said, look, he was having a discussion with a woman about Camarena, and that was a year that he had been able to do an encore, which doesn't happen often at the Met, in Cenerentola. And he was talking to her about it. He was so excited. And she said, yes, but you know, he looks so kind of pudgy or something like that. And Tomasini's takeaway was, oh, not like Camarena needs to go lose weight. It was that woman is not part of our opera's target audience. And this is something that more people need to be willing to say. If you don't understand the fact that the superior singer should be the one who is selected, then you are not an advocate of opera, period. That's what I think.
Great. Anybody else would like to jump in? Yes.
I would actually, because
Yes.
I'm very much in the same thinking of Tichina and Stefan and Jeremy, and in my personal experience and also watching what some of my own singing clients are going through, I feel like at my age, I'm at an interesting perspective because I feel like I transverse when ageism started to, what's the word I'm looking for? Started to really be almost exaggerated in the business. When I was a young girl, and I was sitting in the living room looking at the Metropolitan Opera, season program with my dad, and we were cavelling over, what singers were we going to watch on the telecasts. It was always about the voices. I don't know that anybody thought about age at all. What moved me in order to be crazy enough to want to pursue this for the rest of my life was not the fantasy of being a pretty girl on a poster. It was the sound of somebody's voice that moved me. And when I think about my mentors and also the singers that I looked up to when I was a baby at Curtis, there was almost a line of demarcation that I saw and heard amazing world-class instruments being nurtured by intendants. There was a general feeling that it was a sense of pride to be the one to discover a unique otherworldly talent. And what made that singer worth the professional loyalty and the financial investment and the time investment was how moving the voice was, And as I walked away from pursuing singing and then came back to it in my early 30s, it was like the landscape had changed. And there was a different set of rules at play in which, in my own humble experience, as somebody who's been everything from nobody knows who I am and I'm just an overpaid corporate secretary, to singing a guest role at Deutsche Oper and everything in between, there was a sense that despite or in spite of people getting viscerally excited about my singing and getting very direct verbal confirmation through my agent and through intendants directly that they were so viscerally excited about my singing, there was a sense of fear in casting, that somebody was waiting for somebody else within the hierarchy of the industry to give a stamp of approval. And I didn't see my fellow older generation colleagues go through that. It's very, very interesting to me. And so there was definitely a shift. That's how I sort of experienced the change. And I grew up in a value system in which the very uniqueness of the instrument, what made it different than everybody else, what made the artist emotionally and musically mature, was something to be celebrated. And what I'm finding specifically with some of my singers that are between the ages of about 30 and 35, they're not even given a platform where I used to have a platform, that they're being cut off before even being given an audition because they're 31 or 32. And yet, if these voices had 5 or 10 minutes to be put in front of the audience, they would garner the loyalty and the kind of blood and guts reaction that this art form has always lived off of. I get the feeling, and again, it's my own humble opinion as somebody who's not particularly famous, but who's in it for the long haul and has dedicated herself to the marathon, that people have stopped trusting. People have stopped trusting what's actually exciting and unique about the art form. And I consider myself very, very lucky that I just happen to be put in front of people who have the power to do casting in some very good opera houses who still have an older sense of pride in discovering unknown talent who don't really care about age. I was very lucky, and I have colleagues of mine who I love and respect, who really have something to say with their instruments, who haven't been as lucky as me. I'm sort of like my career trajectory is almost like a misnomer, if that makes any sense. So it just really breaks my heart. And I also do think that when it comes into the intersectionality, I absolutely agree that opera is more and more reflecting the outside ideals of Hollywood, that young and sexy or young and pretty is going to be what gets butts in seats. But we're not spoken theater, we're not film, we are a musical, larger than life, visceral blood and guts art form. And I worry that we've gotten into a little trouble by not trusting what makes our art form unique and beautiful on its own. And I also think that it gets into the larger issue of ageism, in which for some reason there's this, as Stefan says, there's this sort of very uncreative, uninteresting stereotype, which is actually false, that women and men lose their sensuality, lose their sexuality past a certain age, lose their vibrancy, because it's the actual timbre of the voice and the maturity of having been around long enough to have life experience to pull into your character that make you a master of the craft. And when I think about what is the most moving to me, it's always the vocal mastery. My friends like to tease me that I say that my fake boyfriend since I was 18 was Giacomini, you know, and he had like the Mr. Magoo eyeglasses and balding and like old enough to be my grandpa. But just that voice on YouTube clips, which is already just a thimble of what he probably sounded like in real life, was the most viscerally thrilling, handsome, noble, kingly, like sexually attractive sound I had ever heard in my entire life. I would drop $200 when I had nothing in my pocket just for the chance of being viscerally connected to that experience. And I just really hope that we can find our way back to that. I really, really hope that we can.
Okay, thank you so much. Anybody else on the roots of ageism? No? Okay. So one of the things that I wanted to really chat about is education, since everything starts with education. There was, when we were preparing this panel with Susan, we were really going into deep discussion of how education contributes to the issue, and how we ingrain these ideas early on. And she came up with a great quote, which I will read right now and kind of want to circle the discussion around that. How our craft mastery and potential consistently confuse purpose on purpose within the educational structures. So I would like actually to start with Carol on that, because you're deep into teaching and directing within those institutions, I would be really interested to hear your take on how education contributes to that,
Okay.
or the institution of education, rather.
So I'm just going to throw some things out so that more of you can discuss, because I'm very curious about what you guys think. Number one is the fact Francesca pointed it out, all of you have pointed it out. I think the art form itself, we're trying to make it, so what about opera is viscerally makes us want more of it, is being in a live space and having the sound vibrate your bodies and go with you. I mean, what we're forgetting is that being in the space and having that resonance surround you, the vocal folds are like 33 millimeters long, and we're able to get over an orchestra and vibrate people's faces. And that's what we're missing. We can't take opera and, like, I think the HD live, that's lovely, but even a recording doesn't pick up the intense vibration that a human body one human body, little larynx, the size of a walnut for a man, the size of a pecan for a woman, okay? And it creates a sound that vibrates the entire space and human beings in it. So we have to think about that, and the fact that, like what I said, some of the institutions are trying to do is recreate opera so that it's more accessible, but then you're missing that major piece that is the art form. That so I think that there's potential for students to sing beautifully, but can everybody be an opera singer? I don't think so. I also think that we have to figure out, maybe there's another genre that you should go into, and maybe we should be telling them that. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I think the last piece I'll say is that the education systems, the institutions themselves are trying to stay afloat. So they are taking maybe singers that they know won't be opera singers, but their main curriculum is about opera singing. But if they don't take those singers, they might not make it that year. And so I'm just going to throw that out there.
Okay. Anybody else want to jump in?
I'd like to jump in.
Yeah.
So I don't feel so far removed from school, but I guess, 5 years, depending on, in a young artist track, 5 years is a long time to be out of school. And so for me, what has been most interesting about hearing everyone speak is that I can kind of see both sides of it. And I see where, when you're young and you're just getting into school, if I come from a place in Queens, New York, where like there's no opera singing, there's no music like that. We sing gospel and maybe some jazz, some R&B, but there's no one there that's teaching little Black kids that look like me about opera. And if it weren't for my high school, I would have been completely oblivious to this. So me as a budding young dramatic voice, I was already kind of like out for the count. Shouldn't be here. And so there's that aspect of the education and the need to go out and further seek out these young voices, because there are plenty, whether they're big voices or small voices, there are plenty of, underprivileged communities that don't get this access. And that's a disservice that I feel that opera in general is not meeting. But then you get to the like, okay, you found it. Opera's your thing, you're gonna go for it. And then you get down to applying for schools. And when I was in high school, I happened to be fortunate. I went to LaGuardia High School, which is the famed school. And they kind of put into my mind that I could be both a pediatrician and an opera singer. So I was like going through life, like I'm gonna go and I'm gonna do a dual degree and I'm gonna do all this stuff. No, you have to pick your path. But how was I to know, coming from where I came from, that Juilliard or MSM were great schools. I just kind of got lucky. It seems like a theme of we got lucky. When do we start to take out the luck factor and make it more about the education and bringing these opportunities to more people? I feel that opera as a whole needs to be sort of seeking out these people and these opportunities for young singers to come, because once you get into conservatory level, yes, conservatories are accepting way more students than they should. There's definitely, you know, this sense of, well, the conservatory has to stay afloat and how much we can do. That's always going to be a thing. America is about capitalism. That's just the way it is. But what about the kids that don't even get to go to that conservatory, like that don't know that they have this potential, that aren't able to? And then let's say you don't go to a top conservatory. The conservatories are kind of weeding us out at every level. The talent pool gets lesser and lesser and lesser just because of the opportunities not being available. And if, just as Jeremy was saying pretty early on, if you didn't go to this top conservatory and you don't have these connections, whether you've got the talent or not, you're not going to be considered. So then you get down to the 10% and you made it and you're great and you're going into these young artist companies and you get those auditions, you're getting the auditions. But let's say you've got a bigger voice. These companies can't afford to have you just sit in the background and grow. The young artists' positions are mainly to save money on smaller roles that these bigger voices are not suited for. And that just is also is what it is. But there are less and less companies in this time who are even willing to consider taking on a bigger voice to just have them sit in the background. So that's an even smaller thing. And then if you're a lighter voice and you're young and you're trying to get into these young artist programs, well, you're competing with hundreds of people that are just like you, potentially cookie cutter. And a lot of these companies are kind of willing to accept cookie cutter. And then these careers peter out by the time you're done with young artist services. There are so many people that have young artist careers and then don't make it to real careers. There are so many bigger voices that can't afford to wait out the game and the time it takes to get their instrument craft and honed, so that, you know, there's that gap. So in between those people that are 30 and 40 and are just trying to make it, it all just becomes a waiting game, as opposed to having these educational structures and competitions and things like that, allowing students who are older perhaps, or who are trying to go through the different passages and seek out, you know, where their voice will actually land. I feel like we've gotten settled on you sing where you are, where you're going, and not where you are. And that is something that the educational system has kind of fostered, because they want us to be singing with our full potential, what they hear, and not what we are. So as a young, bigger voice person, I might be able to sing a countess, but no one wants to hear me do that. No one wants that. And similarly for a smaller voice, if maybe you might become a fuller lyric voice, no one wants to hear you sing me. They want you to sit over there and sing Zerlina and just be calm. And I feel like the education system has been doing us starting younger and younger, greater and greater disservices. And it's very telling in the talent pool that is at the end of the road when you get there.
Okay, great. I think, Andrea, you wanted to say something. Yeah.
Well, things that both Francesca and now Alaysha have shared kind of play on this idea of gatekeeping. And I think opera has a great deal of gatekeeping that happens. It happens in corporate America too. But when it happens in opera, it's of course leading to ageism, but it's maybe the elephant in the room, or maybe it's not, but it also leads to racism and a great deal of other isms, I imagine. The gatekeeping that happens at the education system, Alaysha, as you pointed out, like, not every little brown girl, little brown boy has access to the arts. I did. It's certainly not, my story is not singular, but it's not common, perhaps. And so I was fortunate enough. However, when you look at the cost of attending those big schools, those conservatories and things that provide the stamp of approval, that then gives you the stamp of approval to go into artistic diploma programs, into the top young artist programs, into getting sponsors and those sort of things, the barrier to entry there is cost and access. And as Alaysha said, excuse me, if you don't know about them at 17 or 18, you are not preparing for them. So you maybe you go to a regular school, you have a regular major, and maybe you look at it for grad school or something like that. Even if you do know about it at 18 and you want to go for music, we are not far removed from the civil rights movement of the 60s. And I think it is not untrue to say that in the homes of many minorities, this idea of going to school for your dream is fresh, and fresh only to my generation. And you'll notice I did not share my age earlier. I'm completely happy to leave it ambiguous. But you know, it's the socioeconomic, the economic disparity, at least in America, between people of color and our white peers is such that the idea of going to school for a dream and something that may not guarantee you a job, it's not always encouraged. Lucky if it is, but it's not always encouraged, okay? So if you happen to be fortunate enough to figure out that opera is something you want to go into and you do it, then economics is a real issue. And it's just to point out with real data here. In 2016, it was the case that in the United States of America, the net worth of a white family was $171,000. In comparison, the net worth of a Black family in 2016 was $17,000, 1-7. That's $154,000 net worth gap. So when you're trying to go to conservatory at $30,000 a year, that becomes an issue. I'm not saying it's expensive for everyone. I don't dismiss that, okay? It's a hardship for everyone. But all of these little things, the barrier of entry into opera, the $35 application fee for every audition, the needing to be in the right rooms at the right summer programs to meet the right teachers, to get to the right grad school, to get to the right major young artist program, and to have your name pushed forward for the right competition, suddenly those opportunities dwindle away. So not only are we, by doing that, missing the big voices, but we're missing voices of color. And then we're sitting around a table and going, where's the diversity? Well, the diversity is 35 and has been working, you know, to pay for a $250 voice lesson. The diversity has been actively singing and taking voice lessons as much as possible and coaching as much as possible, but cannot afford to not work for a summer and go to Italy or go to Graz. It's a barrier to entry that is created by age, but by doing so, you're also creating all of these other barriers. That means that you're losing talent because they say, you know, I have a family to feed. I cannot be a burden to my family. My family doesn't have it. My neighborhood doesn't have it. So even looking for support or trying to have teachers that will champion, that look like you, and that will champion you is I mean, it's so rare. It's so rare. I think that in all the auditions I've done in my life, I just shared this with somebody recently, but I think there's only been twice that there has been someone that is visually Black behind the table. Never in my life have I had a Black voice teacher. That's okay. I've had some wonderful teachers. I want to give a shout out to my wonderful teacher who's here. Francesca is fantastic, and I'm very fortunate to have found her. I'm digressing a little bit, but it's just to say that by having any sort of ism, we are tacking on to all the other isms. And any of the problems of the day that have become trendy to talk about in opera are all born of these things, are born of putting limits around things that, frankly, I mean, to flat out have an age limit on a job description is illegal in every other form, and we accept it.
Yeah.
And not only do we accept it, we encourage it with each other, where singers are actively lying about how old they are and encouraged to do so, to get a job in something that they pour their heart and soul and lives into, blood, sweat, and tears. I get very passionate. It's just, it's like, we're creating this problem, and then we're writing articles about it, but we're not doing anything. We're not doing anything.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Tichina, yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to piggyback a little bit on the educational aspect of the thing, because, you know, as I mentioned, you know, my educational experience was a long time ago. You know, I graduated high school in 1983. However, back in those days, I want to say, and I've noticed this as I have, you know, a few students, and I've been doing some master classes and become a sort of an educator myself at the moment, or not educator, but teacher, you know, trying to pass on those things that I've experienced, that I do feel like the gatekeepers, the educators, those who are responsible, as you would say, for the tenor of the business, the way the art form came across, were very much different back then, because I, like Andrea, was not, I had no idea about classical music. You know, but like Alaysha, I went to the sort of the famed school of the South because I was in Atlanta, and there was a performing arts high school there. And had it not been for my instructor there, who, you know, I came to that school as, for example, as a junior in high school. And my first year, I sang The Wiz, Dreamgirls, and all of that stuff. And in that year, that William Dinsmore, may he rest in peace, and who I give great honor to, heard something in my sound and said, I think you're going to be an opera singer. And I said, what's that? You know? And he, the next season into our touring company, he taught me after school, extra time for no money, O Rest in the Lord, and Street de la Vampa, and built them into the touring show my senior year, so that by the time auditions came, drove me to Cincinnati Conservatory auditions, Georgia State auditions, like 4 university auditions, until he got me in and got me a scholarship, you know. And had it not been for that, you know, I mean, I saw my first opera at Georgia State, which was The Medium from Menotti, you know, and I was bowled over because it was music, it was theater, it was like all those things I had been doing, but in this grand scale all together. And then I went to the music library and discovered an album cover with Jessie Norman, a Black woman, you know, this, and I, you know, I'm not a small woman, so this was all very inspiring and encouraging. But I do feel, from what I've been able to see and hear from young singers that I've had a chance to work with or whatever, this educational process is completely something else these days, and I really feel that it's a tragedy for the operatic art form. I really do.
I feel.
If I may,
sorry.
Sorry, Jeremy. I think in my point of view,
Go ahead.
The biggest difference is that, I mean, those days of singing well, doing auditions, getting a job, and then an engagement without too much efforts are just generally over. It's competition on all levels has increased, and the number of traditional engagements at opera houses and concert halls, that has gone down as well. So, and I think the big problem also for those young artists is just to find out what their artistic profile is, what makes them unique. And many of those people, you feel you actually need to tell them, look, remember to stay authentic. Don't try to bend yourself into an artistical persona just because someone else may be successful being that way. It's very difficult for those young people. I mean, the situation over here in Europe is a bit easier, I would say, with regards to the costs, you know, of that education. But it's really a huge, and also, I mean, in general, I would say careers are shorter in general. Let's say, I mean, it's difficult with numbers, but let's say 15 years, 10 to 15 years on a high professional level. And I mean, that's definitely a big threat for many of us.
I'm not very good at butting in, but
Please,
can I
do,
say
please
something?
do. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
I don't quite know how to. The educational system is so different in these last 10, 20 years to what it was when I was educated. I mean, I think there's just too much choice about, you know, how to go from school to conservatory to young artist programs. You know, I never had any of this choice, and I think that maybe it is so expensive for young singers now. I mean, look at the masterclasses. Anastasia, that's how I met you. Yeah, how much did you pay to be in that masterclass? And anyway, that was something quite different. But I think that you know, what I did, we had our education at college, and then you just went out and you auditioned or competitions. But now they're extending it with another young artist program and this program and that program. That's how it is in England anyway. And I have a nephew, a young nephew. He's nearly 30, and he's hardly earned a penny yet because of the education system, you know, persuading him to go into yet another program. And now, why don't you go over to Germany and be part of this program and that program? And I'm just baffled by it all. And I really think bring back the good old days when I was just able to sort of, there were lots of opportunities to audition, and people started off in very good choruses. You know, there's nothing wrong with being in a chorus and covering and gaining experience from that. I mean, that's how I began, and then going into competitions. But I'm just a bit concerned about this ongoing young artist program. I'm sorry.
I really want to say something to that.
Please, and then we can move on to casting and the tendencies in casting based on ageism. Please, Jeremy.
Right. So I think the big issue is the fact that the training and stuff that Rosalind was mentioning, it's been really corporatized, and it kind of has turned into its own industry that a lot of the time doesn't have actually much of anything to do with getting anybody a job. And what Stefan was saying about how the competition is stiffer than ever. But it's interesting, right? How if it's more competitive, but the talent pool is somehow shallower, because it's competitive among the certain people who can, manage to be in a profession where you're in a young artist program and you're not really earning very much money. I have a friend, who is a young artist at a major young artist program in the United States, and tells me what he earns, and I'm like, that's not very much money. It's just not very much money, and the idea is, okay, eventually you'll make a certain amount in the future. But I think the problem is exactly what Rosalind was saying. Institutionalized learning does not necessarily produce great artists. And a lot of the greatest singers of the 20th century that we have recordings of did not train the way that people are training now. So it's like people are getting lots of training, but it's not necessarily the training that they need, because what you really need as an opera singer is you need a supportive voice teacher, somebody who teaches you how to sing, and you need an opportunity to sing. And now those things seem to be the things that people get the least of. You may have an opportunity to learn a whole bunch of repertoire and various genres, right? You're expected to have your Baroque aria, your Mozart aria, you need your English aria, all this stuff is so regimented in the United States, but you don't often get a chance to just get up and sing something. And then, there's all this micromanaging that happens where you're getting almost too much feedback from these educational structures, and it becomes a bit like codependent or something. It's like where they need you to constantly come back. And it's like, actually, maybe everybody doesn't need to be able to sing a French, a German, Italian, everything equally well, because actually, I don't think Pavarotti sang very often in German or French. Not saying that I am in the level of Pavarotti, but I mean, the point still stands. Or Christa Ludwig tended to sing in German. Jean Crespin tended to sing in French. She was an exception because she was very good with languages, so she also sang a lot in German, and she also, I think, was fluent in Italian. So that's a bit of an exception, but the principle still stands that people should be allowed to play to their strengths. and that there's too much gatekeeping in opera, and that these companies should be hearing people directly, so that exactly, you know, what's been mentioned earlier, that people who, it took them a long time to get over just the financial hurdles at the beginning, when they didn't have the privilege to just be able to not be making any money for 10 or 15 years while they were training, they finally got their, you know, financial situation in order in a capitalist society that we live in, to be able to do some auditions. For example, next year I'm going to do a competition, and it's the first time that I'm going to be able to do it with the pianist that I normally work with, because the age limit for both of us is, or on the competition, is like about 10 years higher than what it is normally. I think there should be no age limits on anything. But you just think about how many times like people are just excluded before they even have a chance to even show what they can do. And you start to wonder, what is the real purpose, except to kind of maintain the system in which the individuals who are privileged enough to be able to make it through the system and end up getting jobs, can continue to do so, even though it's not really for the good of the art form. It's, and in fact, it's to the detriment of the art form, when only people who are very wealthy can end up having much of a chance to do it, you know?
So I would like to jump in here and talk about, because a lot of you mentioned gatekeepers, that phrase. So I would like to talk, kind of the last point to talk about is about casting. And then pairing with that, what are the institutional changes you see helping kind of the taking away some of the gatekeeping. So how is casting done today? How does inherent bias affect that casting? And how the lack of knowledge of those casting contributes to that? And then pairing with that, how do we shake up the system? And how do we make changes and bring some accountability into that? I would be particularly interested to hear from Stefan, since he sits on the other side of the table, and then take it from there.
I mean, it's a bit delicate for me to talk about competence of those people. I mean, of course, there is always this question, and probably I could generally say that there is a lack of competence compared to earlier years. Especially with the musical part of it. I mean, very often there are directors sitting there in auditions interested in a certain kind of typecasting, and you know, if it's Turandot, they think it should be a princess, and I'll tell them, look, but you cannot have a young princess singing that role because you need some kind of maturity for that, and that's a problem. And unfortunately, also many of those musical, let's say, leaders or correpetitors who should have a say then are, I don't know, maybe they're not included in the process. So that's definitely a problem. If we regard it from the musical part of it, that this kind of typecasting, I mean, in Germany, for example, we have more and more directors coming from drama theater, and they are looking for types, and but that does not always fit to the needs of those roles, and that's definitely a problem. But you know, for me, as I said, as a mediator, I mean, I would only take an artist if I think I can get him or her work. So I'm in a difficult position. I'm talking to the intendant and to the opera director. I'm trying to find out what they are looking for, and I will go and, you know, and help them with those needs. And if I have a very trustworthy partnership, I can tell them, look, are you sure that you are not destroying this voice with those kind of repertoire? And are you going to do you want to have some sustainability here in this career? And you know, what will be next? And unfortunately, those people are mainly looking for new faces. So it's not, for them, it's not let's say, an issue if there will be another one doing this role. And we all know there are many artists, especially from Eastern European countries, who are willing to do all they can for having those jobs. And well, you know.
I would like to piggyback off of that because, again, you know, I'm sort of looking at it as somebody who's still singing and still who's still getting hired to sing, and also who has, you know, singers in my studio that are, some of them are, you know, have enjoyed much more prestigious careers than I'm ever going to see. And some of them are like young budding singers. And I think, you know, we are at a time where, how can I put this? We have to deal with the reality of the business as it is, right? It is a hierarchical, it is by nature hierarchical. If you do not have the relationships with casting directors to influence them, right? What I always say to my singers, and I'm starting to work with, I've been working as sort of a guest teacher at the Young Artists Program at Vancouver Opera for about 3 years. And what I tell them is that creativity is like water. It's an energy that kind of finds its way around obstacles. So if this is an art form that has enough meaning to you that you're willing to hang in there for the long haul, part of it is figuring out what you do have control over versus what you don't have control over, and being the change that you want to see. So for me personally, one of the advantages of not being 28 anymore and having professional relationships that started from 20 years ago is that I now, even if it's not at an A house level, maybe it's at a C house level, maybe it's at an emerging opera house level, I still have relationships where I can get on the phone myself and call and say, you know, I've got this 32, 33-year-old Lirico Spinto that was just rejected, you know, from a summer program because of her age, even though the artistic director said that she was the most moving artist they had heard through 5 days of auditioning. This kid deserves to be heard. What can we do about it, right? I have to take responsibility, you know. I teach on scholarship. If I have somebody that really has the instrument and has gotten caught in the crosshairs between the industry of conservatory yaps and has aged out of competitions that used to have the age cutoff at 35 and now only have the age cutoff at 28 or 30, you better believe that I'm going to put my money where my mouth is, and I'm going to contribute to what I believe in and the value system that I believe in by offering free or discounted lessons in the way that all of my teachers did for me. I wouldn't be here talking to you right now if Arthur Levy didn't give me free lessons for 6 months, if I didn't have an agent who said, I know that you haven't sung in a prestigious or a house, an opera house of name for 5 years, but you're the kind of A house singer that everybody's missing. Come to Germany and stay in my apartment for free for 3 months while I send you out, you know, on auditions. So I, in my 40s, I take on that mantle. I do that. And you stick up for what you believe in any way that you can to allow for the next generations to move forward. And I, you know, one of the other things that I'm doing is I'm hopefully going to be volunteering my time speaking to the intersectionality of racism and how racism and capitalism become sort of like really toxic bedfellows. Michael Fabiano, who we all know has enjoyed a very illustrious career, has started a foundation that specifically targets offering free private lessons in schools, in high schools, where the ethnic demographic is usually underserved. We're also talking about in America, the fact that arts and music programs were almost completely dismantled by the mid to late 90s, right? So all of these things kind of converge in on one of the others. I'm living in South Brooklyn. It's a lower middle class, working class, old school neighborhood. And the arts is just not really existent here, right? It's it's the shishi foo downtown Brooklyn neighborhoods that seem to have more artistic foundations serving them. So if I really believe passionately about this, again, I'm going to do my footwork to start building performance opportunities, exposure to classical music, education for classical music within, you know, my own community. And the other thing that I would say to that is that with the idea of some of the things that Stefan was comfortable sharing, the idea that even what a career trajectory means, it needs to be okay to talk about these things, right? One of the things that I see that also intersects with ageism is that nobody's allowed to talk about the fact that they might be doing something else to pay the bills, right? So even by being willing to be on a platform that talks about age, for instance, I have to risk people who do the casting to look their noses down on me a little bit, you know, because of negative stereotypes. I'll give you a perfect, for instance. I've been vocal on my social media about the fact that I teach. And I have an agent that I work with off the books that called and said, you know, there's this German opera company, I believe it was an ARB house, who had heard me 2 seasons ago, was very, very interested in what I was doing, but he was worried that all I was doing was teaching now, because I actually was public about the fact that I was teaching, in addition to all the singing that I'm still doing. So I think for me, in my own personal trajectory, it's kind of like put up or shut up time. And that's one of the advantages of being 40 something, right? I've always made my own unique way through the industry. I continue to dedicate myself to the art form because it changed my life. And I believe that world-class singing changes people's lives. It's not meant for everybody. It's not meant to be a popular commodity, but to that small percentage of the world population that's moved by the most amazing singing in the world, you'll end up with hardcore fans for life. So I think if every person that feels this passionately about the issue does what they can, maybe 15 to 20 years down the road, we can see the needle of casting tastes and casting habits kind of pull more towards what we personally believe in. But we have to be willing to, instead of just talk about it on an online Zoom forum, then get off of the camera and go do something about it. So, you know, that's kind of about it.
Thank you so much. Andrea, you were lifting your finger. Yes.
Well, it's Francesca just said something that that resonated. About a week ago, I had a colleague and a coach reach out to me and say, you know, Andrea, you're still actively singing and you're putting yourself out there really big with your other business, and you should take caution, because which are you? I just, you know, Francesca kind of touched on this, but it's utterly ridiculous that you could only be one or the other. One feeds the other. At least in my case, I don't have a trust fund. So that I work feeds that I can do opera and that I can become a better artist. I have a big voice myself. I think most are now prepared to agree that I should sing Verdi and the like. I'm not going to tell you my age again, but it takes time, as we all acknowledge, to develop artistry and to develop that kind of voice. And it would be bizarre to expect that someone is just off sitting in a field of lilies somewhere, not earning an income, waiting to become a wunderkind 29-year-old who can sing, you know, Aida and the Wagner ladies and so forth. And that's a strange notion. And so I feel like maybe there's a little bit of a risk in being so vocal, maybe, but I'm all about authenticity, and I'm unwilling to pretend that I'm something I'm not, or that I just tripped upon singing and that I don't have to feed myself or pay Manhattan rent. I'm just not, I'm not willing to do it. And if you're interested in casting talent, if you're interested in casting a fully formed artist and a woman who has some lived experience now, then you'll hear me sing or hear my colleagues sing or anyone with any degree of talent sing, and you'll cast on talent. And maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe that's idealistic, but that's the opera that I want to see. And that's the opera that that stole my heart as a young kid. When the first thing I saw was Bohème and then a Turandot at Denver Opera. And anyway, I think casting should be about the whole person. It should be about the voice, and to whatever degree any sense of gatekeeping and ageism, racism, etc., keeps someone talented off the stage, then we're doing a huge disservice, and we have to ask ourselves how much we love the art.
I wanted to piggyback on what Andrea was saying. So,
okay,
and I just,
thank you.
Yeah,
then
I
we're
just.
gonna have Alaysha. Yeah.
Okay, sorry. I was going to say that, yeah, I think it's mostly the institutions themselves. That's where the change will have to take place. I think what Francesca said is really important and really inspiring. And if the institutions are then filled up with people who espouse these values, then the industry, I think, would be in a much better shape with regard to ageism and with regard to racism and all the other problems it's having, including the dearth of really mature, strong voices that can handle the operas of the genre's maturity, as I keep saying. But for example, earlier when people were talking about the institutions and the lack of access for disadvantaged people, these institutions, they have, like, particularly, I'm thinking of the Met definitely has the resources to be going into these schools and not just singing for people, but bringing those people to the Met and saying, look, this is what we do, and training them, having training institutions for younger people, having auditions that are open, that are not through agents, being like, we want to hear people, we just want to hear people, like, and it's not the Met auditions, and it's not, because you have a certain agent, we just want to hear people, because, and then that, I think, in and of itself would open up more opportunities for people whose careers take longer to develop, usually as a result of the whims of capitalism. That's what I wanted to say. It's the institutions themselves that need to take to make the effort to make these changes by just doing something as simple as getting rid of the age limit. That's not even something that's super proactive, right? Get rid of the age limits on your competitions, get rid of the age limits on your young artist programs, and also that the size of this kind of shadow training industry of pay to sings, it's like I call it the pay to sing industrial complex, really needs to be shrunk. It needs to be shrunk. And I think that makes a lot of people uncomfortable because they think, oh, what I'm going to be doing. But I think there should be more people then who are not afraid to say, okay, maybe I'm not doing a pay to sing, I don't have the money to do that, but I'm working, supporting myself, and hopefully one day I will have be given the chance to actually show what I can do. And that would, in and of itself, that change would be revolutionary.
Okay, so before we wrap up, Alaysha, you wanted to say something? Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to piggyback off of a couple of things that people have been saying. I completely agree with Stefan about, the understanding that directors and casting people are having now in this day and age. And there needs to be more open-mindedness and a willingness to bring in back something that Carol said earlier, to let singers go through the path that they're going through. We might be young and starting out as etas, but there's a way that we can grow and develop, and so that we're not sitting around stagnant. There is a sense of imagination that has been lost, and I think it is on the onus of these companies to bring back and restore. There are definitely people out there who are like Stefan, who are not lost. The understanding of what the business is not lost on them. So if we could have a resurgence of people like that, that would be incredible. Also, Terry mentioned open call auditions. Broadway does it very successfully. And there are no application fees. We are the only, business where we have to apply for application fees, and that in itself is a barrier for many people. If application fees were removed, if age limits were removed, these are things that, yes, they will be expenses for companies, but like the amount of money that is being saved on younger artists in general, the amount of artists and talent that are being lost by these systems that are in place. I think that once it's sat down and thought about on a grander scale by these companies, they will see that the cost benefit it just outweighs the detriment. And then there's also one thing that I wanted to mention that we didn't really talk about, but that is very important. I feel that is lost now to us in this age. And that's kind of like the middle of the road companies. They all just kind of like crumbled. And so like the young artist circuit kind of picked up that slack, where usually it used to be that you could get out there, do a young artist program for a couple of years, and then you would get to go to a company like New York City Opera or something like that. And as those companies had faced hardships and post-COVID, who knows what the world will look like. So it's not like it's going to get any easier for anybody. But if companies would raise age limits, remove fees, and perhaps just give artists a fighting chance to make it through this difficult time and to come out triumphant, perhaps we could start to get back to a road where there are more opportunities. There are more opportunities than singers, which is not the case right now.
Great. So we're gonna wrap up very, very soon. Thank you so much for staying a few extra minutes. But before we go, I wanted to hear if Tichina, Rosalind, or Carol have anything to add. Final thoughts?
I think my final thoughts are that we are in this operatic business, there is a reckoning coming in. I think that we are due a complete change of the guard. I, for one, hope to be on the other side of the table when the guard finishes changing, so that these concepts that, for example, Francesca and I, we sort of have very similar trajectory. We had people who supported us, who believed in us, and who did not judge us for when I was, way overweight, or when I was way, the wrong. And I believe that this is what has to happen. There has been a lot of power in the same hands for decades that have brought us to this place that we are in this business. And I just think it's time for a complete change of the guard. And I hope to be part of the revolution. Thank you.
Carol, Rosalind?
So I just want to piggyback on all this, but I think that in order for things to move forward, there's a vicious cycle going on. And so there are all these fees that the opera companies have to pay. And so I know in America, they've now started to institute more musical theater in operas because they think that'll also get more people in the seats. What I think is, I don't mind musical theater. I just think let's try to figure out a way that the people costing opera companies fees could maybe do a little something for them, so that then the opera companies could do a little something for the singers, and then institutions could do something else. There's no way that we can all still keep being paid the same amount. Everybody's going to have to make a slight sacrifice in order for the art form to move forward, and then eventually, or survive and then move forward. I know that singers of mine, what you all were talking about in terms of auditioning, people rarely, even in an open audition, are singers moving ahead if they don't have a contact with the teacher or the other director. No one's willing to take a risk on someone they just hear in an audition and cast them. Oh, who do you study with? Oh, I don't know who that person is. Okay, well, you were great, but this person I know, and so I'm going to cast them. So there's a bunch of things that I think need to happen. Most of it is sacrifice. Every single one of us has to do a little bit of sacrificing in order for this art form to move forward, and it's worth it. It's worth it. It's a fantastic opera form. And like when Jeremy was talking about all those older singers, you were mentioning them all. All those people used to live with their teachers. they would live with them when they studied. They didn't have to have another job because half of them live with them and they saw them every day or twice a week or 3 times a week. Who could afford to see a teacher 3 times a week now? Nobody. So I'm just
Francesca, can I
saying,
move in?
yeah, there you go. So that's all I'm saying. I just think let's work together, make the sacrifices that need to be made so that we could move forward.
Well, I agree with everything that everybody said. I've got slightly lost the thread because of the ageism concept. But I'm sort of, you know, being a much older singer that's had, you know, I've sort of been there, done that. I can only sort of tell you that nowadays it is just so completely different. And I find it very hard. I would hate to be a young singer at the moment trying to break out. I just don't know how they would survive, especially now with COVID. And so much of, when you talk about the casting directors, you know, they do as they do their best. I mean, well, most of them try to, but you know, there's so much going on with the directors and the conductors. They've all got their personal choices, and it's not a matter of who the casting director chooses. It's, you know, everyone has to go through the director of the opera, the conductor, and I mean, it's just endless, and it is so hard for young singers breaking through. And I do, you know, you're right, we've all got to do our bit. And by the way, you know, I'm still singing. I'm going to Stuttgart next week to start rehearsals for as Mamma Lucia in Cavalleria. You know, I've really singing for nothing like what I used to get years ago. My fears, you know, I'm just happy to be still chugging on. But, and I think sort of just to sort of say that that's my bit. You know, I'd sing for nothing if I could, but I really feel very much for the young singers, and I really hope that that they can all get their say.
Please don't sing for nothing, Rosalind.
Well, you know, I mean, not nothing, but you know, a hell of a lot.
But if I may, Anastasia, just to end with something positive. I mean, my feeling is still that what audience still appreciate the most is dedication and truthfulness, and these are really ageless criteria, aren't they? So I mean, you know, that's still what it's all about.
Yes, those are great final words. I just wanted to mention that I've seen a lot of conversations online happening in singer forums on all of these issues, and I'm personally very encouraged that singers are talking about this, and it's COVID has been a catalyst for these conversations to happen. And to push them forward. So I'm personally very encouraged that people are talking about it. Thank you each one of you and all of you for partaking in this panel discussion. It has been wonderful to have you and to hear your voices on this issue.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Listening to you all.
Bye. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.